All right, it's right at 6:15. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we can jump right in tonight. Just to get better in their marriage. Covenant between us and you. And so, God, we don't take that lightly. God, I pray that you watch over this evening that we can be. We give you all the glory in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, welcome all those online. Let me make sure yep. Last week I was muted half the time, I think. But anyway, we're going to jump in. I know last week we had a night of worship, so we're going to kind of backtrack just a little bit. Diamond Gems. You did the flip-flop day, so you had to drive. Nice. Yeah? You nodding? What'd y'all do? Went to Evangeline and did the flip. I'm just kidding. I drive. My wife does not drive. Oh, my God. Oh, she's watching. I better shut up. Oh. I wanted to live, so I drove. Yes. Oh, awesome. Dude, you pulled out all the stops. Went to Birmingham. Oh, okay. Did y'all do the flip? Good rule of thumb to a happy marriage, I guess. All right, so we're going to jump right in. We're going to kind of backtrack a little bit because I'd start unmet expectations, right? So we've talked about the 7 frustrations that you had. You know, you expected to be accepted for who you a grenade, and you threw it right in my living room. So my goal is not to get y'all to argue. My goal is that y'all go home and you talk about actually talk about two subjects today. And both of them may be awkward for you. I don't know. We're going to talk about money and sex. And here's why we're going to in the reality of marriage. And so probably the top 2 stressors in a marriage are these two topics in a lot of marriages. And so that's why we put a lot of emphasis in these two. Once we get past these two, the rest of it should be simply the easiest one, and that's money. It's going to cause you more arguments than any other topic that we go over, but I consider it the easiest one. Well, some of the biggest fights are over money. When I got you to write down earlier a few weeks ago what your expectations of your expectation of yourself, your standard for yourself is to be a protector and a provider. Their emotions stem out of that. When it comes to money, there's a lot of fear around money. There's a lot of fear around sex. Last week, and the fact that I'm a swiper, I'm a big spender, but at the end of the month, right, when you got to pay a water bill and you look and the bill's more than what's in the bank, right? And so it creates a fear, oh my goodness, or, you know, you get ready to go to an even bigger frustration if when you get to that point, you actually thought that there was money in the bank. Right, because this is how conversations with me and my wife. Implying that she spent it all. She don't spend nothing. And then she pulls out that bank statement, and what she ends up showing me is all the $2, $4, $6 chips. And as a matter of fact, I'll just, you know, this is kind of a marriage class, so I'm going to confess a little. Handle things from school. Do y'all get those? And I'm not dogging you if you're a teacher, but we get one about every month at Northside where they want our kids to sell something for the Lions Club. And I am not a people person, so I had to knock on all of my neighbors' doors and ask them to buy brooms. And so it just creates any showed it to me. And I said, that's about $35. If I give you $35, will you not sell anything? And she said, yeah, I love that, right? But I didn't tell my wife that because that's, you know, bribing your child and parenting. And so I didn't think that would go over well with my wife. But anyway, I was supposed to take my daughter out of there, but I couldn't get there, so my wife had to take my daughter today and go spend $35 of money that I bribed her with. Needless to say, I can't see that far, but they look locked out, but they're really happy because they're waving. So, way to go, Mom. That's great parenting. Well, it's going to get to the end of the month, and I'm going to want to know where all the money is just because I took my daughter to Target or I bought chips for my kids. So we talk about every dollar has a name. Let me fill in the blanks. If you weren't here, we'll just blow through these fairly quickly. To those watching online, I'm going to stand up here and tell you how you should budget because you're not in my house. We're going to budget different than you are. Each person with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. So many of us are in debt. In America, the average person makes it to the end of the month, but we've kind of created our own problems, and so we talked about how the money is not the root of all evil. Satan, like when you do your budget, every single dollar that comes in should have a name to go out. So when you do a budget, you don't do all the fun stuff. So within a budget, what we need to be doing is we need to create our fun. We need to create our hobbies. My wife doesn't care if it's done or buying the kids clothes or whatever because it's worked into the budget. So the budget is whatever you guys make it. How many of y'all went home and one that people fight the most about? But I encourage you, when you sit down and you do the budget, there's a couple things you ought to know. Or the first month is probably not going to work out because you're going to have forgotten some things. So there was a quickie budget, and then there was a cash flow thing. So it went more, like, here's you an example of why you need to go a little deeper into your money. A lot of people will budget for groceries, right? We kind of know what we spend on groceries. So a lot of people will budget for groceries. But then when I ask them, so did you budget for like cleaning supplies as well? And they're like, laundry, soap, any of that? And they're like, I didn't think about that. Also, under your food budget, we have a growing practice to another. All of those stops don't get budgeted in. So the money cash flow budget to laundry, supplies, to eating out. But we talked about every dollar has a name. And then we talked about a healthy way to do a budget is 10% to God, 10% to me, 80%. They don't. And here's the beauty of percentage-based budgeting. Percentage-based budgeting means whether you make $1 million, if you live on the 80%, you know what you'll never do? Spend over 100% of what you brought in. You'll never spend over, as they make a budget, 90% based on what was brought in the year before. You know what they don't have to do? They don't have to stress. And so in marriage, you don't have to argue about spending 120% of your money waiting on that check and hoping it hits so your check clears. 10% to God, it's biblical. I'm a pastor. I don't preach on it that often. But ultimately, Scripture says give 10% to God. And I believe that God can do more with 90% than we can do with 120%. And then 10% to me. So how many of you, here's what you need to know. If you're living check to check and you have no savings account, one of your biggest arguments will be when something breaks. Because then you're not able to provide and you're not able to protect. If a transmission goes out or a AC in your house goes out in the middle of August, right? We've got these things that just happen. If you have no margin, we're going to talk about $2,000 to $5,000 things. But it can be something as simple as a tire can blow. Right, if you're already living right on the edge and a tire blows, and I just buy about 14 of them because I think I'm saving money, but that's cool. I could have bought a set of 4 by the time I paid 14, depending on what kind of tire you have. So if you don't have margin, you will fight. My goal is to keep y'all from if you stay in that 80% range, you will not fight about money often. You just with your budget does not matter to anybody else but you. But here's what you got to do. You know the way a budget works is if both of you agree to it. How many of y'all in your house, you do the checkbook? I know we don't really do checkbooks anymore, right? So you've usually got somebody that does the checkbook. But ultimately, you've both got to come to an agreement on how you're going to spend the money. Another fight that I talk about, that sometimes two people get married, two become one. I think you will stay in frustration and arguing about money if you do not combine your bank. You should have a joint bank account. That creates intimacy. It creates trust. It creates compromise. It creates so many people who are in my office arguing about money. They've got separate accounts and separate agendas and separate ways of doing things. But that's wondering where it went. If you do a budget, you don't have to worry at the end of the month, where did it go? Because back in the day when we used to, a bank makes a mistake, not very often, right? And so knowing where your money goes is a big stinking deal. Let's talk about debt for a second. The Bible talks a lot about debt. It says that the borrower, I've determined, I would love to pay off my house one day, but I've just determined I'm always going to have that bill, right? I don't go into Lowe's and try to do very well. But one of the things that I do know, the less debt you have, the less stress you have, right? The less debt you have, the less stress you have. And you know what? Hard bills, you know what? Every month, you might as well whack, a couple $100 off the top of the money, of your hard-earned money that you're buying those. You could buy those if you didn't have all that debt. And so it creates a really big tension in this. And so we keep a credit card, and I know, again, this is where I go away from Dave. But we keep a credit card in case of a major emergency. Multiple credit cards, and you're using multiple credit cards, and you're racking up debt. Here's what usually happens with credit cards. You use the credit card for gas here, and you used it for cleaning services here. You used it to go on a date night here, and you don't think anything about it. Well, the problem with credit cards is it has those high % interest rates on it. And so if you have multiple ones of those, have multiple debts, the best way to do it, and this will not make sense to a math major, and I understand if you're a teacher and you want to argue with me, I'm going to go ahead and tell you again up front, you are correct. You're not wrong. I'm just telling you that not to do that. A debt with larger interest rate will cost you more money over the long term. I get it. But it's like a diet. If you go trying. And so what we want you to do, and what Dave teaches, and what most financial experts teach you, is start with that's one side of it. The other side of it, let's say you have 4 debts that you have to pay on. Let's say you have a school loan, let's say $1 a month, and the rest of them you have minimal payments. The way we teach is this: you take your smallest credit card. The payment after you pay off that credit card that you've been making, right? That payment, instead of a minimum balance, but now you're paying over the balance. And then after you pay off the second debt, you take the accumulation of both payments and you put it to the third debt. See why we call it a snowball? It keeps growing. Your payment keeps growing. So then by the time you get to I've seen people pay off vehicles that had 7 to 10 year loans on them and pay them off in a year or two because they were able to use this process. But this process takes massive discipline because you have to not absorb the payment. And that's another thing that causes massive frustration. This is what a lot of people say. A lot ready to have a child ever. And then about the time you realize how much they cost, you have child number 2, right? It just never stops. And so they're ready for that. But the other thing that I hear is, when I make more money, I will, start saving. That happen, and we want to believe that's what's going to happen. But more often than not, what happens is people get a raise or they get a bump in the income and some side of a budget, right? And so you got to continue to alter your budget into a percentage-based budget. So often spend everything that we get. And usually they say that the average is 4 to 6 months after having a raise where you feel like that you're broke again, that you feel like you need another raise. And it's because we'll take extra money that we bring in, and we decrease spending. Some of y'all are very talented. Go find something to make a little extra money. I've always called it a side hustle. Spending money so that you can stick to your budget. You can have a little fun. You make $50 here, $100 there. Decrease spending. We spend beyond our means. 80% of households that they make. And this is what that's going to cause. It's going to cause you to be on my red couch one day. And y'all are going to be screaming at each other. You're arguing and you're not communicating anymore. But it can be fixed. Increase income or decrease spending experience that I've had in the past 2 weeks is to sit there and look at insurance numbers. I could care less. I don't know. 3 different roadside assistance services, right? We're paying one with Geico. We were paying one with our home. And so I have to call AAA at least once every 3 months since I've moved to Alabama. But we won't get into that. So the truth of it is we went into our homeowner's insurance. We went into our car insurances. We went into our television. We've created 3 different internets because depending on if it's cloudy or rainy or the wind might be blowing 2 miles an hour, we don't get internet. Uverse, and then we got this new thing called MoFi, and I'm just seeing if it works. But now I'm paying 3 different internets. And so as different things in all of these apps, and we started looking at the different apps that we had that we don't use, but yet we're still paying money on. Everything from, and we found stuff on there that we don't even know how we got it. And it wasn't much. It was like $9.99 here, $4.99 about them, or it's a 7-day free trial that you say, yep, I've got 7 days. Hey, remind me to call and cancel this, right? And then because we go out and we spend this money. So I want to encourage you in your budget to go through. You can find a lot of money as you may even be paying. You can also look at refinancing, getting lower interest rates, et cetera, et cetera. But we're going to talk about honor for a second. There are more than 2,300 verses on money and possessions today. But God, all throughout his scripture, talks about money. He talks about you can't be in of debt. If we did our finances the way that God instructed us, it would lower the arguments to dishonor God, because the things that come out of your mouth to your spouse, right? So money can cause dishonor in a church. The word tithe literally means the tenth in Hebrews. And your tithe, the Bible tells us that tithing is a way to show that we trust God with our lives and our finances. I have people tell me all the time, 1% less than 11. It's 10%. Doesn't matter how much you make. God set the table. He put everybody on an E. People don't set aside that first 10%. As a matter of fact, most people don't set aside the 10% in savings. Why? Abel kept flocks. Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of his soil as an offering to Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry. If we can steward the money well, if we're in debt up to our eyeballs, we're wasting money left and right. Don't expect God to be like no one else. Later, you can live like no one else. If you live like nobody else now, especially early in your, most Americans will no longer retire until their body can no longer function. Because I want to encourage you guys, sit down together, do a budget, do the cash flow plan. You can find it in your booklet. I don't have it. Readjust. You're going to constantly have to tinker. This is not one of those set it and forget it. So life changes happen. Maybe constantly be sitting down, and I get it. Nobody likes to talk about this. This is not one of those woo on an evening when both of you are in a good mood. And just so you know, you probably won't be when it's done. But hey, at least you'll start that way, right? To be able to work and talk through, I encourage you to bring your bank statements. Don't throw out words like much, right? If you've never talked about it, what's too much? How much is too much on a pair of shoes? How much is too much on a shirt? You know, and so you need to and do the budget and the cash flow plan. And I've got it on here for you to do it for 3 months. Financial peace, and they've got a lot of information in that. They've got a lot of helpful tools. It is by far and away. Let's talk about sex. This is that really awkward one, and here's why it's awkward. So if you grew up in church, I grew up Southern Baptist, all right, and this is what you were told. It's bad, sex is dirty, sex is bad, sex is dirty. Now save it for your spouse. And then you get married, and you shouldn't talk about it, and you shouldn't think about it. And then, by the way, be fruitful and multiply. Some honest conversations about sex and marriage. And the reason we are is because, again, number 2 is sex. Every time. Because we have an expectation. And marriages are a lot different. Some of you may stuff into your marriage. You're each bringing things to the table that cause you to view sex through a lens oftentimes based on our experience, right? Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this on the front end. If we did it God's way, it wouldn't be that. And again, yes, she knows I'm talking about us. Here's the problem. I brought massive baggage into our marriage. I take into that a healthy view of pornography. And then you have a skewed expectation, right? Because pornography is fake. man, like the air, I don't know, for those watching online, I don't know if the air just got sucked, because those things hide in the shadows. Well, the problem in marriage is we keep them in the shadows. And the problem with marriage is we go into relationship expectation. That first time you walk down the aisle, like you could care less about anything else at that wedding. At a minimum, I don't know, 8 days a week. That's true, right? That's our expectation. I ain't lying. I told my daughter, I mean, straight up, this is probably taking it too far, but I told my daughter, young guys have an expectation. And then you get into you get into marriage, like women, y'all have an expectation, right? And I'm going to tell you something. I've been married, I don't know, almost 17 years, and because oftentimes when it comes to this is where we get really quirky and we don't want to have a conversation. That we talked about, here's intimacy. Intimacy is not sex. Sex is just the act. Intimacy is two hearts intertwined. Of intimacy when it comes to sex being broken is all of that you feel this with, right? If you're, or you may feel it with some hobbies and stuff that are just not as healthy for your marriage. But when it comes to sex, when the intimacy is broken and you leave space, there's nothing that's going to fill that space that is not going to cause a massive issue. I mean, pornography. Let me explain to you pornography. Pornography to the person, and I would say this, I would say to the wife, but it's no longer a wife issue because national statistics say 45% of women actively look at pornography. 7 in the top 5 of viewers of pornography. You know who the top 5 states are? It's not California. Ranks number 1. Mormons. Like that whole state's churches, right? Alabama, I think, same effect. It will have the same feeling. It will have the same emotions as a full-blown affair. 98% of couples who explore and somebody else comes into their relationship. But we also have these massive expectations that we never talk about because we've had a lifetime of people telling us you shouldn't talk. Look at there. I'll be darned. He didn't, right? He made us. And so the first thing, sex, for such a small word, it has an enormous influence on our lives and our marriage. Unmet, that's going to be a frustration. If you expect to have sex a little and your partner expects, we don't talk about it. Intimacy is not sex, but sex plays a key role in intimacy. Thing that fills that void of intimacy when it comes to sex will blow out your marriage. Whether that's porn, whether that's an affair, but oftentimes it will open the door to the enemy for an affair. I say that. But at some point, if sex is not happening in the relationship, intimacy will be and has a plan for our sexuality that far exceeds anything we could dream up on our own. Forward to that, right? Because God created a plan for it. The reason we have so much trouble with it if we don't do it God's way is God, and sex was part of that plan. And every time that we have sex outside of the person that God has, you have sex with somebody other than who God has for you, you rip off a piece of that heart, and you rip off a piece of that heart, and you rip off a piece of that heart. And so that is what creates a massive problem in the spiritual world when it comes to sex. Get it wrong. It's like you should be ashamed to talk about sex. Don't talk about it. It's shameful. Shameful. Created it not to be shameful. They ate of the fruit, and what did it say? Their eyes were, but God created sex to be an intimacy builder, to be a heart. And so the next one is when we connect with God's plan for sex, we will connect with our spouse in ways that exceed our highest expectations. You're going to get. I know that's a really awkward statement, isn't it? Right? See, it's awkward. You're like, most vulnerable. You know what your spouse sees? Or you know what your spouse better see? All the things nobody else sees, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And so it's at that point that we are at our most vulnerable. I have you naked. And I looked at him. He said it in one of my small groups. And I was like, huh? Right? Because she's like, we don't do that. But you're at your most vulnerable, right? Yeah, there you go. He knows everything about you. That is the most intimate thing you can do in a marriage, because this is what you're doing. You're saying, and I'm going to trust that you will love me with all of my flaws. Right? Point that you better not have with anybody else, especially if you're married. Right there. We spend so much time fertilizing relationships that aren't with our spouse. Our coworkers. If we spent half the time fertilizing our relationship with our spouse as we do with it, what's left over. Drink water from your own well. Share your love only with your wife or your husband. Share only your love with your wife or your husband. Why spill the water? If you wondered what the Bible thought about it, there it is. Drink from your own well. And here's the problem. Over and over and over. The space that gets opened up in this area will relationship with an idea about sex. Some of you have been hurt, right? So some of you may have had an abusive situation. So you've got a lot of scars when it comes to sex. So it's really hard to trust. It's really hard to hand over the most vulnerable part. We're going to knock some of those down. First thing you need to know, sex is never a punishment or a reward. I'm saying all this, and I'm all over the internet right now. I'm not going to live this down. But it's true, right? It's true. If you're in a marriage long enough, you've probably used sex as a condition. Right? It's not a reward either. First off, your spouse isn't a child. You shouldn't have to bribe them. Let's just get past that. But sex is never a punishment or a reward. It will lead to resentment. And it's manipulative, by the way. It is massively manipulating to use it as a correct. Here's what a successful, so I can't even say it. I've got a speech impediment, so you can just read the spelling. Wife coming home and you being slouched out in the recliner watching the ball game, right? And the house being a mess. How about she comes home and you've straightened everything out and you got you a candlelight dinner, right? Do the unexpected. Do things that they don't expect. Keep them off guard. Now, you can go out and you can read all these books and not just Venus and Mars or something, all right? But there's one out there that's called a crock pot and a microwave. Women are like crock pots. Men are like microwaves. We're going to talk. Folks, man, that sounds bad. Sometimes you need to do the unexpected to set the mood. Can vacuuming the floor? Some of y'all don't know what to do with that. But it's true. Think about it. She's had a hard day at work, right? Huh? I'll be. It's not a reward. You're doing it for everything. Get the babysitter. Plan all the details. Lay your clothes out. Be like, hey, I'm taking you out. We need to get a babysitter. It's what a successful husband does. And that is a key element of romance. Doing things that she doesn't expect in groups, right? Because I can watch talking and I can watch elbowing. It's kind of fun to watch. Do the unexpected. The next thing, I'm jealous. Like, I'm not a guy that gets out of habit. I just don't. I go eat at the same places. You know why? Because if I go somewhere else, me and my wife going out on a date the other night. We started the whole, I was like, yeah, well, what do you want to do? Hey, we're going to go on a date. You know what would be awesome? Hey, babe, this is what you need to wear. Not like telling her every article of clothing, casual. And you just handle it. Take the initiative. Take the initiative. Planning dates, creating experience, the concept of that. Let's put alcohol and axes in the same place. I'm not real sure I want to be in that place. But there's axe throwing. Guys, if your wife likes to do all that crafty stuff, take her and do pottery. It's not about the night you're having at the pottery. Who cares? It's going to be a good night, right? Take the initiative, big time. And they get in practical. The moon by the lake. Right? When was the last time that you just got spontaneous and you did Rock City, Ruby? I don't know, where do we go around here? We're going to the beach. Right? All right. You want to talk about a good weekend. Get in practical. Well, what about this? What about, I got it all. Guys, this is a huge deal. And I put on here specific statements that communicate your spouse's value. When was the last time you told your wife how smoking hot she was? When was the last time? Think about it physically. Okay, so maybe you're not a verbal guy, right? This is not what it's talking about. It's not talking about walking out the door. This is talking about communicating verbally with compliments. When was the last? I'm thinking of you smoking hot. I don't know, what can you say in church? Knees. That's verbally. It could be a text. It could be a note. Leave them a coupon. Tell them this. You know, when your guy walks in with a button up on instead of a t-shirt, notice it. I'll just tell you straight up, slapping my wife's butt. All the time, man. I am constantly, and obviously I'm not the only one in here because I see her. But I've been smacking her butt for 17 years. It ain't going to change. It's not her job to change me. The day that I stop doing that, there's probably something wrong. Because that's how I communicate. That's how I communicate. I want you. You know how I am not a PDA guy, right? Unless I'm smacking her on the butt in the mall. Straight up, I'll do it. When was the last time, like, let's say you and your spouse, y'all are walking down the mall and some half your age comes walking. You know I'm right. I took my sons down there and was like, oh my gosh, I just gave them a lesson I had no intent to. One is life-threatening. You can follow them with your eyes as your spouse is walking beside you. Or you can turn and you can look directly. It's going to give you a better night. Telling your spouse that they're all that you want. Telling your spouse that, all right, now I'm going to, if I haven't ticked you off yet with the two become one with money, when you get married, two become in counseling. That causes the same emotions of an affair, all right? And it's now called, and is that even real? Yes, absolutely. It's real. Two become one. I hate social media. I have it. I'm not going to recommend that you have a joint social media account. Right? But me and my wife don't do that. But we had to do it for a while. I did my junior year in high school. Thank God. Because I was stupid. Right? It was goody. But the problem is those things I left. See, at 17, I jumped on a bus and I went in the Army, and I don't know that I ever really went back to Southside, Alabama until probably about 5 years ago when I was coming for in high school. There's some that actually live in Tuscaloosa that I've seen, but I haven't actually gone up there. I haven't been to a reunion. I haven't been to a problem with that is we have a lot of relationships in our past, right? I had relationships in the military. With Facebook comes out, and it's all pretty cool because, man, I can reconnect with people now. I've reconnected with 3/4 of the people I graduated with. Ex-girlfriends. You know how much my wife wants to know who they are? None. And your spouse? Let me answer that for you. It causes a bunch. And so my wife, at any given time, I have Facebook. She can go through there at any time. You know what she can also do? She can go through my contact list at any time of my internet searches. And here's how you keep intimacy. Trust. Affair. Period. Chat rooms. Pornography. That the past should stay in the past a lot, right? But if you lose trust in this, it creates feelings that you have. Oh, that's going to aggravate some of y'all. Well, I'm not going to be under my spouse's thumb. And as a spouse, I'm at it. There's a problem. Right? There's nothing on that phone that my wife shouldn't be able to. Your phone, turn it, get into it with the password, and now hand it to the person to the left or the right of you. And you want to watch people go, yeah, especially when it comes to being trustworthy. Giving compliments verbally and physically. Letting my wife reaching over and grabbing my hand. If I brush her hand off, and I'm not a PDA guy, I don't like holding hands. I don't like snuggling in public. And somewhere in the back of her mind, the enemy's going to get in there and say, he doesn't want you. Sweats a lot, and that's just nasty. That's all I'm thinking. Or we're going to walk up into something that we're going to have to split. But you know what she's thinking? You know what the enemy's got in her head? I'm not pretty. He doesn't want me anymore. He doesn't want to be seen with me. Physically. That could be a text. That could be a note. That could be a good old-fashioned butt slap. Let's talk about successful wives, especially in the deep south. It says, you know what, you're dirty, or it's nasty, or it's not your place, or you're not a Southern belle, or whatever that's called. But and so you shouldn't be aggressive in the sex world with your spouse. When was the last time? And now, please don't raise your hand. I don't actually want an answer. I'm really hoping my mom and dad are not watching this live tonight. When was the last time that you had it with your spouse about things you want to do? Well, that's just awkward. What? But seriously, when was the last time you had an open conversation about what you liked, what you didn't like? I mean, I've had that. Well, we've been doing it that way for 15 years. Well, I haven't liked it. Well, knowing there's an issue. You can't fix it. They can't read your mind. Like, communicate what you don't like. Communicate what makes you uncomfortable. Right? Have open conversations. Ways to make love instead of making excuses. Here's what so like my wife goes to grab my hand, right? We'll cause this really fast. It'll cause a break in intimacy because he will feel rejected. Once you can have go see a doctor. People don't have headaches every night. If you're tired every night, you need to start taking naps. Something. If you continue to say no, if you continue to make excuses, the book that's on the back cover, and I encourage everybody by the name of Ed Young, and at the end of it, there's a challenge that you go and you have sex every day for 7 days. And like, yeah, of course you like that. But you know what you find that is actually a really hard thing to do. And guys, you can talk all the smack you want. You want to talk about rejection, right? You just turn down your wife to watch a bunch of sweaty men and you don't have time for me. Well, I really don't feel like it. We make excuses. Excuses. Thought this conversation was awkward. It's about to get even more awkward because I don't know how to present this any other way than straight up, right? So women like to be, slow cookers, right? You do stuff around the house. You work for it. Whew, man. And so you work for it, right? Guys, I mean, they need what? Sex? Sure. Okay. What, now? That was the awkward statement. Go ahead. But it's true. It's okay. It's 5 minutes out of your day, but here's what you're... And is it really that off-putting? Something as simple as being available can take you from here, really working for it and really showing your wife that you care can go from here to here. And you know what here does? Here never comes into my couch. Don't always wear sweatpants and muumuus. Oh, let's be real. Right? It's true. Get creative in the bedroom. Ask your spouse. When was the last time you asked your spouse, what's my favorite outfit? Conversation with your spouse. What turns you on? Get creative. And then be honest about the bedroom. Communicating honestly about sex. Hey, what is your, maybe an expectation is, hey, we're going to do it at least a few times a week. And one of you is like, hey, we may do it a few times a month. And that's usually later as we have kids. Like, there's a reason honeymoons are great. You've lighted the candles and you've been created and you've communicated. And man, you just about to have a great night and you hear, go away. Right? Or heaven forbid you forget to lock the door. That'll end the whole evening. Don't get any better when they're teenagers. Mom, they won't get out of my room. I really don't care, son. Go spend the night with a friend. Right? We've got a guy on expectation. Nobody's right. Nobody's wrong. It's your expectation, and you brought that expectation in for conversation for you. If you grew up in a kind of a free-spirited home that your parents were super affectionate and they just, talk about what you need to know. Neither one of you are right, neither one of you are wrong. It's your expectation. Knowing's half the battle. If I know what your expectation is, I can make strides because it's not my job to change Cassie, right? It's not my job to change her expectation. It's not her job to change my expectations that make her uncomfortable for me to hear. When she speaks candidly or she gets creative or she tries something new. Right here, going to this right here. And how you were raised often has to do with whether this is all. The following are some of the most common excuses. And then we're getting ready to close out. I know it's getting close to time. Here's some constant rejection. I'm just letting you know. Find a way. Get there. Get in the mood. There's not a free second on the calendar. It's the joy of God's creation, right? How many of y'all have more than 24 hours in a day? Raise your hand. Nobody. We got a leap year. We all have the same amount of time. What we do with our time, we choose. It's not Pastor Scott's fault what you do. Time for your partner. And this is what I've honestly done. And this may sound a little goofy. Here's just so you know, date night on so long without having sex that it's become awkward for them again. Or they never have time, or they're at all these ball games, or they're going to different directions. What often should we schedule it? I don't know. Y'all talk about it. Guys, they want to schedule it 7 days a week. But because otherwise we will always be too busy for our spouse. And our spouse should be the number 2 thing in our life behind Christ. You need your undivided attention from 8 o'clock, right? We're going to put the kids to bed. We're going to send them to their friends. We'll have 1,000 things to do, but on your calendar, schedule time for your spouse so you can keep that intimacy tight. Can't be mad forever. Stop using the past against them. Sex is not a punishment. Sex is not a bad, what? Angry. Because it will bust up that intimacy. And if they feel like that they can never recover and quit trying, you know what happens when you quit trying? You go find it somewhere else. Validation. You'll go find somebody that tells you, number 4, kids. It's the number 1 intimacy breaker when it comes to sex. Kids. Kids are not the center of your home. Biblically. Spiritually. Kids were not created to be the center of your home. Raise up a child, and when they get old, they won't, depart from it. And is because your kids should grow up and they should leave, hopefully. Right? One day they're going to leave. But yet far too often I did it. Your kids should not dictate the intimacy that you have with your spouse ever. Ever. 2 hearts beating as one with Christ in the center for a lifetime. Right? And so you spouse first, your intimacy. We have a responsibility to satisfy our mate sexually. Anybody ever just sat down and read the book Song of Solomon? That's some homework for you this week, or Song of Songs, depending. And it's in the Bible, and here's why. Because God created sex. God created this as an amazing gift. And it's our responsibility to satisfy our mate. It's not our job to change them, but it is our response, spouse, to need to go to look at porn. Let's just be real. I don't create any space for my spouse to need to be talking about their problems at work with somebody else of the opposite sex. Because we're so close and we're so intertwined that we can two as one, intimate. We have a responsibility to satisfy our mate. One of the most difficult yet crucial aspects of marriage is placing the priority on the needs of your spouse. This is where the conversation has got to happen. Conversation's got to happen. But knowing's half the battle. Now, maybe your spouse's expectation is so far-fetched you're not going to do it, and that's all right. There's compromise in that. They're clueless about how male and female sex drives are different, and this can cause a lot of tension in the bedroom. I've always believed that when it comes to sex, in an instant, a man can be ready to spring into sex. It doesn't matter if he's just had a major argument with his wife or if his bank account is over. A woman, more or less, jogs into sex. A husband experiences sex, and from his sexual experiences flow his... See, that's the difference. That's a huge key difference. I want you to draw an arrow. I want you to circle that. Big time. Big time. A husband experiences sex, and from that sex flow his feeling, his intimacy. So you see, when you're coming at it from different angles, there's an expectation there. Y'all have to talk about that. And then the next thing, no matter how, even if you got to schedule it, don't go in it like, oh, fine. Here you go. Into it, and is that real intimacy? Is that telling your spouse that you want them? Is that telling your spouse that you still find them attractive and beautiful? Willingly, energetically, and frequently. After all, sex is about the yes. The Bible is very clear when it comes to the subject of a husband and wife having sex regularly. This is where it can get convicting. Put enough energy into pleasing your spouse sexually. You need to answer that internally within yourself. Do you feel like that you put effort into pleasing your spouse sexually? If not, what keeps you from doing this? What keeps you from it? What is that intimacy break? Is it you don't feel pretty? Is it you don't feel comfortable? Is it that you grew up thinking it was dirty and nasty and that you would be perceived as a something? What is blocking the intimacy? One thing you would like to communicate to your spouse about your own sex, sexual desires. What's one thing? There's something all of us would love to tell our spouse. But oh my goodness, that would be the most awkward moment in my life. If it's that, you know what, babe? God, I just really hate when you wear that. Or I really hate when you do that. What is the one thing? I don't mean go in and have a 2-hour conversation about your sex life with your spouse this week. I want you to pick one. Things you don't like about sex. See, here's the crazy thing. Most of y'all have never had this conversation. And you're sitting here going, I'm supposed to write down 5 things that I like about sex and 3 things I don't like about sex. Yes. And you know one way to communicate with your spouse that'll be super easy if it's super awkward and embarrassing for you? Hand them the paper. And spouses, don't react. You may see something on there that you're like, whoa. Nope. But here's the deal. If you react, what you're doing is you're saying, read it, acknowledge it, file it away. Even if there's no chance, just file it away. But at least now you've committed. I don't like about sex, we only have it once a month. Well, let's talk about that. Like, how many times do you think we ought to have it? Just not known, right? Now all of a sudden you've brought that gap from way out here to right here, and you don't have to worry about all that junk. The next thing I want you to do when you go home, I want you to grab this phone, and I want 2 to become 1. And I want you to remove all barriers, all past, anything that would make your spouse uncomfortable. And can I say this? If you there's a new one out there, calculator, some of the other stuff. You need to be very careful with that. You need to be. So all it takes is for the enemy to drop something in your line of sight. And my wife is the keeper of the remote. We watch a couple of shows that have had some sexual scenes in there. She has the remote. She can fast forward at will. I don't watch Baywatch to hear. You need to speak to your spouse verbally and physically. Whatever that means, whether that's holding hands, snuggling on the couch, or smacking, kind of thing. So it's going to save you a lot of heartache. And here's what you're going to find. You're going to find out things about your spouse that you never knew. And it's going to actually bring you closer than you've ever been. It's pretty cool. Let's pray and get out of here. So God, I just want to say thanks. Sex is awkward because the world, but your Bible is not awkward. Your Bible is very clear when it comes to money and sex, how it should be. And if we would, each and every couple, as they sit down, they do a budget. That God, one, that they'll begin to trust you enough. Are not turned into frustration or animosity, but God, that money is not the root of all evil. But that, God, we can use our stress. God, I pray for each couple as they go out into and start the discussions about the greatness of sex. It's not a dirty and nasty and taboo thing. God, you created sex between a man and a woman to bring two hearts together in this world. God, I pray that each and every couple that's going through this class, God, that they can have conversations, real conversations, truth ground that'll give extramarital affairs or chat rooms or virtual or any other thing that the enemy can dangle in front of us. God, I pray that hearts are so intertwined because physically they're so intertwined that they enter your word, which is ultimately the guide to our marriage. We give you all the glory in Jesus' name. Amen. There's a date for every week.